Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Samoji, and I hold the Arrell Chair in the Business of Food in the Gordon S. Lang School of Business and Economics at the University of Guelph. And welcome to this session of the Arrell Food Summit. So in the session today, we will be discussing how to bridge the gap between business and government, particularly how business can influence policy and drive change. Today, we are very lucky to have Nadia Theodore with us. Nadia is the Senior Vice President of Global Government and Industry Relations at Maple Leaf Foods, which is Canada's largest protein processing company with over $4 billion worth of sales per annum. In her role, Nadia leads Maple Leaf Foods' global government relations and public policy functions, collaborating across the organization in developing and implementing the company's government and industry relations strategy. Prior to recently joining Maple Leaf Foods, Nadia spent over 20 years in the Canadian Federal Public Service, where she built a reputation for forging strong partnerships with government and business leaders, managing complexity and leading multidisciplinary teams. She has held senior leadership roles on several international trade negotiations, and directly prior to joining Maple Leaf Foods, she served as Canada's Consul General to the southeast of the United States, based in Atlanta, Georgia. Away from her work, Nadia is a proud contributor to organizations committed to empowering people and culture, and she served as Carleton University's alumni mentor and as a global advisor with Girls 20 and on the Carter Center Advisory Board. So with that, thank you very much for being with us today, Nadia.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Nadia, we'll start off. So looking back at what I mentioned about where you've come from and what you've done, it seems pretty clear to me you've worked in a number of government roles where you've had to work with industry, and now you're on the other side of the equation working with government. Well, I should say, flip that around. You've worked with government and then you're working now back in industry. You must have an interesting perspective on how government influences industry and how industry influences government. So thinking on that, what are your thoughts on how government and industry can better work together to shape public policy?
Yeah, and I'm going to start my answer by pointing to the way that you led into the question, because I think that it really speaks to the shift and the change that we're seeing. This idea that there are sides. So, you spend your career either on the government side or the industry side. And I think that, in recent past, we've seen a real fundamental shift, or at least a reframing in this idea of government and industry relationships and government and industry relations. That really is about breaking down those sides. Mm-hmm. And I think that stems from an overall change in what industry stakeholders in particular, and in the broadest sense, believe to be the fundamental purpose of a business. We see, millennials in particular, but I would argue society at large, being more and more invested in the idea that the purpose of business is in creating this idea of social value. And you're also seeing this on the investor side. A demand for more tracking and reporting on positive and negative externalities, this idea that social value, that shared value, is just as important as core and traditional outcomes and outputs of a company. So, there can be little doubt, frankly, of this idea that shared value, and even if the cynics will say that it's little more than a buzzword, there's little doubt that it's changing the way that government influences business and vice versa. So for business to survive and thrive in this new environment of expectation, especially when you think about it in the context of today's very globalized and hyper-connected world, business leaders have to be willing to embrace collaboration as a guiding principle, and perhaps even more as of a guiding principle than competition is and used to be. Because now more than ever, building that collaboration muscle between government and industry has really become the way forward in shaping policy. And I think that businesses understand more than ever that policy agendas are being shaped and influenced by governments in ways that we haven't seen in decades. And so that working kind of in tandem, as opposed to working, across sides, is really the only path to success. And I would give kind of a concrete example when we look at the sustainability agenda or the climate change agenda, whatever word you'd like to, or phraseology you'd like to use. Washington, Ottawa, Brussels, and a myriad of other governments are really becoming key influencers in shaping that global policy agenda around climate change and sustainability. And so any company that is concerned about sustainability, including Maple Leaf Foods, as the first agri-food company to set science-based targets. We need to understand how government is shaping the agenda in order to define aspects of their strategies to meet the challenges of the future.
I think you mentioned something there really clearly about the partnership that is government, that is industry, and government and industry working together on these challenges, as you said, like climate change and being sustainable, for want of a better term. You mentioned a little bit about Maple Leaf's initiatives in that space. Is there any other sort of Maple Leaf food initiatives that you can see that really bridge that connectivity or that partnership?
Well, whenever I talk about the Maple Leaf Food kind of North Star, to me, it is our sustainability promise. And it is the fact that from the very top of the organization, our Chief Executive Officer, Michael McCain, his vision and North Star for the company is to be the most sustainable protein company on earth. And so when you marry that up with what has become governments globally, not just Canadian government, but globally, government's North Star for driving economic growth, for driving sustainable economic growth, for defining competitive advantage, that is also around the climate change question and the sustainability question. So I always use our commitment to sustainability and our leadership in this space. We were just called out in a positive way for our leadership in this space by CIBC in particular, and have won numerous accolades for our leadership in this space, in particular in the agri-food sector, right? But I always use that as an example because I think that it really is the best way and the best example to showcase this idea of collaboration, because it really is the biggest challenge that is being faced both by governments and by industries now and into the future.
So on that theme, and I should say on our theme of our summit as well, we're talking about moving ideas into action. Do you have any tips or recommendations for people both in industry and government on how they can bridge the gap, build those partnerships?
Yeah, Again, I think it's really about focusing your mindset on collaboration, right? I think too often we have a competitive mindset, right? And instead of a collaborative mindset. And so the very idea of shifting your frame to this idea of collaboration between government and industry by its very nature will lead us to talking to each other more about what the opportunities for working together are, right? I also think that, you know, from a very transactional point of view, I suppose, you know, industry and government really need to learn each other's businesses more. And I say transactional because, you know, selfishly or maybe self-servingly, I think that it is a very good idea for practitioners in business and in government to spend time in each other's areas, as I have done, right? And it's not always welcomed or looked upon positively, or thought to be something that is of overall benefit. But I really think that if you're looking for a very specific transactional thing that can be done to forge that collaboration, to change that mindset towards collaboration, you know, proximity is what makes us really understand each other better, right? And be able to work together better. And so spending time in each other's spaces, having more public-private partnerships, to me is really one very concrete thing that we can challenge ourselves to do on both sides of the aisle, so to speak.
So sort of to paraphrase, it's breaking away that, or breaking down, I should say, that wall between the idea of government and industry, and that the two are a partnership that's inseparable, and that collaboration and communication and everything that goes along with developing that is important.
Yeah, and like I said, you know, at the very beginning, you know, not to think of it as two sides, right? It's not always going to be a collaborative opportunity or a collaborative experience, and it's not always going to be. Let's not be Pollyannish about it, right? I mean, we oftentimes have very different stakeholders and have very different responsibilities and accountabilities. Don't get me wrong. Business is not government and government is not business. There is a difference. But again, shifting that mindset towards thinking more about the relationship as a collaborative one and one with a common goal as opposed to one that is competing sets you up nicely to look for the commonalities rather than to focus on the differences.
Thank you. So I think from there we'll move on a little bit and change the theme. I think in your career, you've had the opportunity to represent Canada's interests abroad. So related to that topic, let's talk a little about the international perception of Canada and Canadian food. It's talked a lot that Canada has the potential to be, you know, the leading player in the global food market. So on that, based on your time in both government industry, what is your perception of Canada's food brand or food reputation abroad?
Yeah, well, let me say this, and let me, you know, start with stating what the facts are. And the facts are that Canada makes some of the safest and highest quality food in the world. Our food system is ranked amongst the best in the world, and that's a fact. And I think that fact should be a starting point for any discussion that we have around, you know, building, maintaining, accelerating Canada's food brand and reputation abroad. And I also think that we have to acknowledge that, this strong reputation has been built in large part due to a strong backbone at home, right? A strong regulatory system, an unwavering commitment to science-based principles and science-based knowledge around food and our food systems. And I think that the challenge for us all for the future, or maybe now the opportunity, is how we use what is already a very strong food brand as a bridge or as a conduit to really anchor Canada's agri-food system to be at the core of our future economy. To be at the core of the future of the economic growth of Canada. So, to put it simply, how do we become not just one of the most trusted food leaders, but the most trusted food leader? And I really believe that, a trusted Canadian food brand can really be a catalyst for economic opportunity and growth. But, the rub or the thing to realize is that, that is not a unique Nadia Theodore thought. The reality is that Canada is not the only country seeking to use food brand and food reputation to differentiate itself, particularly when you talk about food systems, right? And so to come out on top, we have to really think strategically. So our branding abroad in relation to food and food systems has to become a real strategic priority for the country. It's not enough, so to speak, just to kind of put our heads down and do the work. Our achievements aren't going to be enough to beat out what is, an increasingly aggressive global competitive space. And if you think about what that means, so when you think about a strategic approach, like what does that mean in practice? I would say maybe two things. First, and I think that, again, self-servingly a little bit from a Maple Leaf Foods company perspective, we are already doing this. We need to make sure that Canadian agri-food thought leaders are at the table of these key global conversations around transforming the food system. And so I mentioned, our CEO in particular, who spends, a lot of time at these global forums, at these global tables that are talking about the future of food and the future of food systems. And I say that that's important and that it's a strategic play because, while it's not directly related to the commercial success of the individual company, it's really at these global tables, at these global dialogues, that the influence for creating global standards and global goals around agri-food and agri-food systems is going to take place. And if Canada isn't at the table as part of those standard setters, as part of the rule makers, then we by default become a rule taker, right? And we lose the chance to shape the future of the global food ecosystem in a way that works for us. And then the second thing that I would say is, this idea that maintaining confidence, and I think for us it is really maintaining confidence because we already hold that confidence in the food system in today's world really carries with it new obligations, but also new opportunities. And if we execute correctly, so if we, focus on building a regulatory system that's fit for purpose, for future purpose, right? Fit for future purpose. If we double down on supporting investments that offer stretch growth opportunities for our industry, if we put in the effort to find real sustainable solutions for our long-standing labor issues, which aren't unique to Canada, right? That are unique, that are global, then we by default will demonstrate to the world that Canada is able to mitigate for what is emerging global agri-food business risks. And in doing so, we will enhance our food brand and our food, our position, and really position ourselves as the safest and most certain choice for investors in what is becoming an uncertain world, right? And so those are kind of two concrete things that I would point to if we're really trying to up our brand and reputation.
I like how you mentioned the concept of trusted, safe, of sustainable, but also just mentioning there about investment and looking at bringing in investment and understanding the importance of investment in the food system to deliver that brand. And on that line, we remember back in 2019, Maple Leaf Foods announced the construction of a plant protein facility in Indiana in the USA. And that raised a few eyebrows in Canada that why wasn't this in Canada? But I think there's a lesson there in that if we're thinking about the future of food manufacturing, what lessons can we have? What lessons can be made about what can Canada do to make itself more attractive to investment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. Firms invest in locations that offer them some type of advantage, right? Whether that's a market advantage, an efficiency advantage, a resource advantage, or some type of overall strategic advantage, or some combination of all of the above. And I would also say that there is no doubt that competition for foreign direct investment is getting fiercer, right? Jurisdictions are acutely aware of the competition that faces them out in the world and are becoming much more sophisticated in their efforts to beat out the competition. So their efforts to kind of tick those advantage boxes, so to speak, is significant and growing. The good news is that Canada, I believe, is uniquely well positioned to deliver what companies need to succeed in a new business environment, right? We have a comparatively strong and stable, resilient economy. We have a labor force that boasts more, I think it's more than 60%. Post-secondary educated, but don't quote me on the 60%, but I believe it's around there. And over 200 mother tongue languages that I remember. We also have a network of 15 trade agreements that provide any company that is based here preferential access to 50 plus markets, 1.5 billion consumers. And so we are well on our way. And I will say also that Maple Leaf Foods recognized this advantage when we made our more than $600 million investment in the London poultry plant, which is the largest single site investment ever in Canadian food history. And so that is a recent investment that we have made, understanding and recognizing the advantage that Canada has. The opportunity, again, lies in not resting on our laurels, I would say, and doubling down on the things that we've talked about today, right? A fair and fit for purpose regulatory system and regulatory environment, strengthening our skills and training linkages so that we are able to meet the labor needs of the future that companies will be looking for, and providing those core incentives for companies to scale up and to invest specifically in machinery and equipment, which we all hear is the engine of growth in an economy. And I think these are all things I think these are all things that are going to increase Canada's investment destination advantage.
Well, so,
And sorry, you know, I would be remiss, and my friends call me annoyingly balanced, but but I would be remiss if I didn't also point out the fact that outward investment as well is more often a complement to inbound investment, right? Rather than a substitute. We always talk about it again in this binary way, but study after study shows that companies that expand their foreign operations also expand their domestic operations over time. And for Canada in particular, if we think about our population size, if we think about, you know, where we sit in the global geopolitical sphere, Canadian companies investing abroad link us to the global economy. It enhances our competitiveness, it increases our trade flows, it exposes us to new technologies, new management models that we then bring back home to make us better back home and more competitive in the end. And so in my view, it is absolutely important for us to very energetically work to attract inbound investment into Canada, but also to not be scared of our Canadian companies who also look to expand abroad. We can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that, you know, look to invest outside, learn what you can, learn from best practice in other places, and then bring that expertise and knowledge back home.
You got it.
So with that, I think we'll go to our last question, Nadia. We've talked a lot about Maple Leaf Foods. We've talked a lot about Canada, but let's quickly talk about you. Looking back at your career, what are the key things that have motivated you to turn, really what is the theme of our summit, turning ideas into action?
Yeah, this was the hardest question. Talking about me, it's my least favorite thing to do. So, you know, I have to say that my motivation to actually do something and not just think about it has usually centered around maybe two things. Having a strong and committed team beside me that share my vision. The importance of team has really been brought into focus for me, in particular as of late, and I'm drawn to action when the support and the momentum is larger than just mine. And then the second thing is, you know, I grew up in a family that was really anchored in the idea of service and community. And I've really made that anchor in my work life as much as it is in my personal life. And so I've really always been drawn to put the most energy and action behind initiatives that represent a broader mission, broader than just kind of personal success or individual company success, that represent something that's, you know, good for me, good for the organization, but that also represents something that impacts the broader community, the broader industry, the broader country, which is what motivated me in public service. Which is what motivates me at Maple Leaf Foods with their sustainability promise and that North Star of really building a sustainable agri-food system in Canada and globally. So it's something that's bigger than just me or bigger than just one company, really drives action.
Thank you, Nadia, for those reflections, and thank you very much for giving your time today. I've really enjoyed our discussion. I'm sure our audience has too as well.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Right. So with that, thank you, Nadia. I have to do a little bit of housekeeping, but before we finish our session for this afternoon. So for summit attendees, if you're sharing about the Arrell Food Summit on social media, don't forget to tag the Arrell Food Institute or use the hashtag #AFoodSummit, all one word. You can also enter the code INFLUENCE, so INFLUENCE, all uppercase in the gamification section of the site to earn extra points. So with that, thank you very much for all being with us today. We'll see you at the next session, which is on the impact of climate change and food. So with that, thank you for watching us. Goodbye, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit.